welcome to this interview with the acclaimed writer Sharon Dodua Otoo. I'm Margaret Littler, and as outgoing president of the Association for German Studies in Great Britain and Ireland, it's my privilege to invite a guest, normally in the context of our annual conference. This year, due to the global pandemic, we've had to move everything online. So this is the 2020 AGS President's Guest. And with me to talk to Sharon Dodua Otoo are Professor Sarah Colvin from the University of Cambridge, Dr. Áine McMurtry from King's College London, and Professor Priscilla Layne from the University of North Carolina. I'll now hand over to Priscilla to introduce our guest.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. I'm very happy to introduce award-winning writer Sharon Dodua Otoo, who is with us today. She was born in London and is of Ghanaian and British descent. She began learning German in school and would go on to study German and management at university in London. Otoo already began writing in her youth, but her writing really took off as an adult after she moved to Berlin in 2006, where she continues to write in both English and German. Critics have remarked about her writing that because German is not her native language, as a student of the language, she is more aware of certain unconscious mechanisms that native speakers might not notice. One could say that this sensibility for the German language has made her equally sensitive towards the racial dynamics at play in Germany. Part of finding her identity as a writer has been the experience of living in Germany, where she is perceived differently as a Black woman, and she can turn a critical eye towards society, challenging normalized behaviors and attitudes, such as in her Ingeborg Bachmann Prize-winning short story, Herr Gottlieb setzt sich hin, or Mr. Gottlieb sits down, from 2016. Otoo has thematized racialization in several of her published texts. The first in Things I'm Thinking While Smiling Politely, which was published in English in 2012, and then in German in 2017. In this novel, Otoo weaves her observations on everyday racism and privilege in Germany into the story of a Black British woman whose marriage begins to break down. Her novella Synchronicity was published 2 years later in 2014, first in English and then in German. In this more speculative story, the female protagonist named C belongs to an ethnic group, the Eji, who are originally from Ghana and who have the capability of parthenogenesis, which means they are able to reproduce by themselves. This creates a matriarchal family of women who do not need men to procreate and who embrace solitude and independence. However, there is also an affliction that is passed down, namely the loss of the ability to see colors. Over the course of 9 days, C loses a different color each day, and eventually each color returns in the exact same order. In place of seeing color, which she refers to as monosense, C develops polysense, which means she is able to perceive the colors in different ways, such as through taste, smell, or hearing. Despite the fact that Otoo's first 2 prose works focus on a Black woman's perspective on everyday racism in Berlin, she does not want them to be read autobiographically. Within the German literary world, Otoo is known for her work both as an author and an editor. As an editor, she is in charge of the series Edition Assemblage, founded in 2011, which largely publishes works by Black Germans in English in order to reach a larger audience. In addition to writing, Otoo has also been very active in Black German activist circles, as well as having worked at the Regionale Arbeitsstellen für Bildung, Integration und Demokratie. She has also published academic essays, such as an essay about the politics and history behind blackface in German theaters, which was published in the book, The Little Book of Big Visions, and an essay called The Art of Writing About Racism, on why it's important to have Black translators for African-American texts translated into German. As I mentioned earlier, more recently she won the prestigious Ingeborg Bachmann Prize for German Literature in 2016. The premise of her story, Herr Gottlieb sits down, is rather simple. An elderly married couple sits down to breakfast one morning, and to the husband's displeasure, he discovers that his egg has not cooked long enough, even though he cooked it for exactly 5 minutes like he does every day. Critics have remarked the story's reference to German comedian Loriot's 1977 sketch, broadcast via radio called The Egg, which is quite similar, only in Loriot's sketch, the egg is too hard, and in Otoo's, the egg is too soft, which a difference which some has taken to mean that in Otoo's story, the egg is resisting conforming to a certain rigidity associated with German national identity, which is definitely critiqued in the story. Otoo's story also differs in its feminist and decolonial perspective, as well as its speculative elements. As a follow-up to her winning the Bachmann Prize, this year she delivered a speech at the ceremony entitled Dürfen schwarze Blumen malen. This clever German title could be understood two ways. On the one hand, it could mean, can black flowers paint? But a more realistic translation would be, are Black people allowed to paint? Otoo poses this question as a way of addressing the limitations that are often placed on Black artists, both materially and stylistically. Stylistically, she addresses the problem that Black authors are often expected to write realist stories and thematize racism in their work. But she notes that at the moment, the Black German literary scene has become so diverse that this expectation cannot be uniformly applied to all authors. In terms of material limitations, Otoo reminds us that part of what allows one to produce art are the conditions under which one works. Does one have childcare needs, financial issues, a precarious living situation? These are all very pertinent questions, particularly in the middle of a pandemic that has taken a greater toll on people of color and demanded a lot from working mothers. We look forward to hearing more from Sharon about her writing, her activism, and many other of the issues I've raised here.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. That's a great start to our conversation. And I'd like to invite my colleagues to ask more about particularly this wonderful text, Herr Gottrup setzt sich hin.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I think I'm down for the first question, but thank you so much, Priscilla, and thanks, Margaret, for the introduction, and especially Sharon for taking the time to speak to us. I've been teaching your work since 2016, and particularly Herr Gottrup setzt sich hin and Synchronicity, and students are every year absolutely delighted by the text. It really is an absolute highlight of my academic year. They're always kind of flabbergasted by how accurately you nail the German breakfast ritual in particular. But I guess in taking the subject matter of Herr Gottrup, you also choose a historical figure who isn't perhaps so well known in the German or wider European context. Helmut Gottrup is an electrical engineer who helped design the V2 rocket that was used by the Germans against the Allies at the end of World War II. And I wondered if we could just start by asking why Gottrup and what brought you to this particular kind of historical figure.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a little overwhelmed by the introduction and the fact that these amazing people are studying and teaching my work. That's really a great honor. Thank you very much for this invitation and for this opportunity to share my ideas and to get some feedback and discuss about the themes. It's an interesting place to begin with the Gottrup, because to be honest, I had no idea who he was and I wasn't interested in him at all. And I stress that now because his daughter, in fact, I think his children, I think he's got children who are still alive and have followed this story. And I once met with someone who's friends with Helmut Gottrup's daughter, who kind of tried to pin me down, say, well, why did you write this story? And why did you paint him in such a bad light? And I think anybody who reads the story, like even with only half an eye, I was going to say, well, no, that is not a biography of Helmut Gottrup. It's deliberately written in a way that departs from the real life man who died in the 80s. So what I did actually was I was originally asked, I think 6 years ago, to write a text about critical whiteness, or what it's like to be a white person living in a predominantly white country. If you've not really thought about what that means, how could somebody explain that to you? I could write an academic text about that, which, I mean, many German-speaking people have done. There's some very excellent publications. I'd like to plug the book, the anthology Mythen, Masken, Subjekte, edited by Maisha Eggers and others. So I felt like I'm not the one to write this text. I think there are enough German-speaking people who can do that. But what I could try is to write a short story, a humorous text. And I thought about writing a male character, and it was my wish to write somebody called Helmut. That's a long story. But I wanted to write a Helmut, and I started to write a Helmut, and then I had to think about what he would be called as his surname. So back at that time, I think that was 2014, there was actually a Wikipedia article which listed all the German famous Helmuts there have ever been. And of course, there was Helmut Schmidt and Helmut Kohl, and I was like, those are not, you know, you can't do much with those names. But this name Gröttrup, that you can hardly pronounce, I was like, that's the winner, right? And then when I was writing the story, I mean, it really interested me that this name was so hard to pronounce, because people of color and marginalized people, Black people living in Germany, know this experience where people are like, oh, I can't pronounce your name. Or we've got that at the moment in the US with Kamala Harris, right? Someone was pretending that this name was too difficult to pronounce. So I love the idea of having a German guy whose name you can barely pronounce. That always amuses me. And then I read a little bit more about him, and it fascinated me that he was basically the other side of Wernher von Braun. And Wernher von Braun went to the States and made this great career and was involved in bringing the first man to the moon. And Helmut Gröttrup, nobody really heard of, although he also did amazing things. And that fascinated me as well, that aspect of the story. So it interested me, what happens to this man, like in terms of him being an expert and him having expertise and having knowledge, but this was being overlooked. I want to say unterschätzt. And I just thought a lot about that, and that inspired me with his character and the way he behaves towards his wife and the way he behaves towards the cleaning lady. But it wasn't intended to be an accurate study of the historical figure.
Yeah. And the cleaning lady, that's a figure, Ada, that you've commented on kind of previously, is quite significant for the developing text on Gröttrup that's coming out with Fischer very soon. It's called Ada's Raum, your new novel, is that right? Could you tell us a bit of a sneak preview?
I think I'm allowed to tell you stuff about it because I've actually finished writing it now.
Hey.
And it's now we're now in the phase where we're correcting last minute grammar things and the dots and the crossing off the T's and such. Ada's Raum is my attempt to explain the story Herr Gröttrup setzt sich in a long form. When I first wrote the short story, it was just going to be that short story, and then some people said, oh, it's really interesting and I'd like to find out more about these characters, and then I thought it might be the opening chapter of the whole thing. I quickly realized that my interest wasn't so much in the couple, the Gröttrups, but it really was more with Ada or Ada and this Wesen, this being that's an egg on that particular day. I wanted to explore them more. I wanted to explain why it is that Ada knows so much, and what is it that Ada knows, and what would have happened if they had accessed her knowledge. So that's how the idea for the novel begins. And then I guess I can tell you this much, that the novel, the structure of the novel is supposed to depict infinity. Like there's certain things that keep going round and round. There's kind of no beginning and no end. And the figure Ada or Ada is a figure that lives 4 times in the novel. In the first half of the novel, you meet her in pre-colonial West Africa, 1459. Wow. Then you meet her in 19th century England, 1848, Ada Lovelace, in fact. And then you meet her in 1945 at the end of the World War in Germany in a concentration camp. That's the first half. And then in the second half, you meet her in 2019, and she does a journey. She grows up actually in Ghana, and then over London, she comes to Berlin, and you experience her life in Berlin. That's the story.
Wow, I can't wait.
That is so exciting. You know, we had this wonderful moment on Twitter recently where Sharon had read something I'd written about the story, and I'd done this kind of academic thing where we're always kind of, you know, looking to make connections. And I said, oh, Ada, it's resonating with Atta, you know, the kind of Atta and Imi ads from the 1950s of the cleaning stuff. And your lovely response, Sharon, was kind of, oh, I never knew that. I've learned something. I thought, great, this is the kind of distinction between what literary writers do and what literary critics do.
Exactly. It's brilliant. Like a friend of mine told me I should just claim that as all the stuff that I knew already and I deliberately put out there, and you are very clever for figuring it out. But I really love it because I think that's why I'm really excited about the opportunity to discuss rather than just to, you know, be asked and answer questions. I think that the text exists beyond me. I think that there is, of course, a connection between the author and the text. I don't subscribe to cutting the author completely away. But I think what the actual, I will say, magic is what happens between the reader and the text. And I don't have access to that knowledge. I'm dependent on the readers or the literature critics to give me the feedback. I can only kind of imagine what I might trigger in a reader, but it's so wonderful to hear the different interpretations that can arise. And yeah, I love learning more about it, actually.
And it's so, I mean, I'm so delighted to hear that we're going to get more about Ada in your new book, because that's what I was left with at the end of Herr Grütze, was this kind of, you too, Priscilla, this kind of massive curiosity about Ada.
I also had an inkling that she's the real subject of the story. So I'm so excited to hear that you have this novel coming out. I really can't wait to read it.
Yes, just to jump in there, I have a student currently writing a dissertation on Herr Grütze setzt sich hin and its various translations. And she also immediately said to me, well, clearly Ada is the most important character. So.
Really? You see, and when I was writing the short story, I also at some point thought to myself, actually, Ada is the main character. And it's a really wild challenge to write a story where the main character barely appears in it or barely says anything. I found that really fascinating. But usually the main response is to focus on the Herr Grütze, of course, because he's in the title. And it really fascinates me when people pick up on the Ada character. And there's one other thing that I wanted to share was in one of the earlier drafts of the short story, I showed it to a friend of mine who's Afro-Austrian. And she told me that she felt sad that the story ends with Ada cleaning the toilet. And she would have wished it to be a different ending, a more heroic ending maybe, or something like that. So I did at some point play around with the idea of making the ending a little bit more open as to whether she really was cleaning the toilet or not. I think I put the word vermutlich in, vermutlich putzt sie die Toilette oder so. And then I took it out again because I realized that it was really important to me that she was doing that work. And it really was important to me to focus on the fact that that work is so, we don't value that work, it's undervalued. And I wanted to kind of give a shout out to the so-called Gastarbeiter in that generation, and how they've been doing all the dirty work and not really being seen. So that's why I made it very concrete that she was doing that work.
And it's incredibly important work, because actually what happens to the world if nobody cleans the toilets? That there's
as we see at this present
really important about it.
I also really liked what you said about how you enjoy hearing what how other people interpret your work, because I always say that one of the reasons I came into German studies is that as an African American who has no German cultural background, it's just fun to me to take these old texts and to see what I see in them or what I can take out of them. So kind of, rejecting this, the Werk immanente, the idea that, oh, the author knew, what this text should be about, and there's only one reading of the text, and that I love this more open way of seeing, the relationship between the author and the readers.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk about my role as an activist a little bit later. That's part of it, right? That as an activist, I'm trying to reach people, I'm trying to communicate with people, I'm trying to affect some kind of change. And yeah, I have no control over that. I can only just keep trying. So it's really important to me to put out something and then to get the feedback. How is it? Did it work? Do I need to adjust? And also the aspect of being an English-speaking writer who's writing in German, that's an additional layer of being dependent on others to tell me if what I intended to say came across.
Yes, indeed. And one of the aspects of your activism is the collaborative nature of your work. That's something that I think Áine also, you had an observation about that. Do you want to?
Sure, absolutely. I think I was struck, or everyone's struck in synchronicity, where in that afterwards you absolutely stress that this was a text that you kind of constructed partly through the email dialogue with friends before Christmas, and also the fact that the amazing kind of 3-part version of Herr Gröttrup with 2 English language versions alongside the original in a really interesting kind of spatialized kind of non-hierarchical kind of form, also appeared with really nice illustrations. There it is. And then the fact that your other, the synchronicity also has these amazing kind of this visual dimension. So I just wondered, that seems to fit into what you've been saying about kind of the collaborative relationship with the reader, but is there more to be said there about your different relationships with illustrators as translators, and how that kind of affects your understanding of authorship?
I guess I was frustrated, to be honest, sometimes hearing other writers say that they lock themselves away in a lonely attic and then create something, some masterpiece, and then bring it out to the world, and then they have nothing, they don't have anything to do with the commoners who are reading. There's nothing to do with them. And I thought that's anyway not what I want, and I don't even really believe it to be true, because we writers are also people who go shopping in Sainsbury's or Riva or whatever, and we read the newspapers, and we might write an angry response to an article that, we interact with the world and we're affected by the world, and then we in turn affect the world. Things that we do have an impact. So I wanted to take that more seriously. I think it's a privileged position that I have, and it's a position of responsibility too. So with synchronicity, that was a little bit more of it was an experiment, actually. It wasn't intended to be a publication when I first started. The year that I did synchronicity, the years before, I think the last 3 years before, I'd been sending a funny little joke over the Advent side, or one year I sent photographs each day until Christmas Day. And that year I thought to myself, why don't I try to do a kind of cliffhanger story thing, Fortsetzung story. And it just about worked out. And what was really nice about that experiment was people kept on, not everybody, I sent it actually to about 25 people. And sometimes there was like 2 people who kept writing to me every day and said, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. Oh, this and that. And that process, those questions did affect what I did next. Because, for example, there was one point where I wrote, right at the beginning of the story, I describe how C is losing her ability to see color and has received the contract of the century, and what's she going to do? Bum, bum, bum. And I write that, and then I immediately got a response, yeah, well, if she's going to receive so much money, why doesn't she just pay someone to do the contract? And I was like, oh my God, what? So then that's how I came up with this, there is no way that she can ever rely on anybody. And then that whole thing of, I can't even say the word, by the way, Priscilla, parthenologism, something, that word. I wrote it in German, so, no, did I write it in German? No, I wrote it in English. Oh, I'm getting confused. In any case, that whole development of why she couldn't see color and the fact that she was able to have children without any men around and all that. That all developed. That was literally every day I wrote a text, and I deliberately wrote myself into a corner so that it would be exciting for the reader and it would be a huge challenge for me. And I kind of can't really recommend writing like that. It's very stressful. But that's how I really literally didn't know. I think it takes 19 days to find out who Sam is, this person who keeps being named. I really didn't know until the 19th day myself who Sam was, for example. So yeah, that was that process.
I was gonna say, too bad writing a dissertation isn't as like riveting as that.
No.
But I wanted to go back to something that you said that reminded me of your speech from the Bachman Prize. You were talking about the idea of the writer being in the world and having like material circumstances that they're dealing with. I really appreciated that because I remember being in grad school and taking a class on Goethe and just being like overwhelmed by everything he wrote about and thinking, well, did he ever have to cook or wash his clothes or clean the house? Like we have all these men in history who are, we praise for being, they were so brilliant. They did much. And I say, yeah, but they had other people taking care of them, which is something that a lot of us don't have that luxury, but I was thinking this would be a good transition to my first question. So as I mentioned in my introduction, another topic you bring up in that speech, Dürfen schwarze Blumen malen, is that Black authors often get kind of they often get kind of put into a box regarding like what they're allowed to write about or what people expect from their writing. And I was wondering if you've ever had any experience with that in your professional life.
If I've ever had any experience of being put in a box and restricted kind of on what I could write.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I honestly don't think I did. I'm sorry about, is it very loud right now? My neighbors are making a lot of noise. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay. Okay. I honestly don't think I did have that experience, but my experience has been very, very atypical. What happened to me in Germany was, first of all, I had already assumed that as a Black writer who's explicitly writing political texts, using creative writing and humor and such, but explicitly with the aim of being, pushing a political agenda, let's say, I had assumed that my writing would anyway not find a home with the mainstream publishing houses. So I immediately looked to publish my first novella with a very small press, Edition Assemblage. I think mine was one of the first books that came out in it even. But that meant that I had maximum freedom. I chose the cover. I worked closely with the graphic designer about the layout. There was a lot of hands-on stuff going on there. They didn't have any influence at all in any of my creative decisions. Whatever I wanted to do, basically, I got to do. And they were very, very supportive. And for that reason, that's very frustrating scenario that many Black authors face. I think not only in Germany, I think in predominantly white countries. I didn't have that experience. And then suddenly I'm catapulted into a completely different realm because I've won this major literature prize. And that made me like, I was completely free then. I could do whatever the hell I liked because I already had the label as, I would like to think Fischer Verlag wanted me because I write such brilliant literature. But I think they also wanted me because they had the label. They could use this Bachman Prize Trägerin label as a marketing thing. So that gave me maximum freedom. So I didn't have that experience of being pigeonholed.
Thank you. I think that was something that interested us all. What has been the effect of the Bachman Prize, and how has it changed things for you, if it has? That's really interesting.
It totally changed things for me because I was working full time. Back to that, living in the real world. I had a main job, with the RAA. Then I had a kind of a side job with a different publishing house, Worten und Mehr, which was specializing in publishing books from anti-discrimination background or impetus.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was also writing. And so this was all a very, you know, I love writing normally, actually. I can't say I always love writing, but, you know, the idea that I'm a writer is a good idea. And I do it. And then all of a sudden, I've won a prize and I've been, I've got a literature agent and I've got a book contract. And I haven't literally got time to do anything else but go to readings, give interviews, and work on my book. That's a completely different level of, I guess it put some level of pressure on me to deliver something that would warrant all that attention. But it was a really nice surprise. Like, for me, it really was like winning the lottery.
You very often take care to kind of stress your multiple roles. You describe yourself in your website, I think, and in interviews as a Black British mother, activist, author, and editor. And I wondered why it is important to name those in that way, and maybe what impact the Bachman Prize had on the other roles, the not just the writer role, but the others too.
Sure. Okay. I one day need to sit down and really write a proper answer to this question. I've been asked this before and I usually end up stammering something, but I'll try. So I always wanted to have it clear that I am a mother. The reason I wanted that to be clear was it was something like, it's my impression that people who have children, and usually mothers, are kind of faced with this kind of impossible task of trying to manage everything and looking like it's very easy. You know, managing the children, it's all very cool. And I wanted to say, no, I have an additional job, actually. You know, this is really hard work. That was part of it. It was like a political identity to say, no, I'm a mother. I'm not going to try and pretend I'm, you know, I don't have this additional housework to do at the end of the day, or coaching, or, you know, driving children around and such. So it takes up a lot of my time. I also wanted to stress, I think, that whatever I do only makes sense if it supports the fact that I'm a mother and that I'm caring for children. So, for example, for a very long time, I would have identified as an activist first and foremost, and probably before I had published work. And that was important. I was really happy to be part of the initiative Black People in Germany, or Initiative für Schwarze Menschen in Deutschland. Was organizing events, going on demonstrations. We'll talk a little bit about the decolonial stuff going on in the city. And then I realized that I'm spending a lot of time away from home, and my children are like eating cornflakes in front of Age of Empires, killing things, you know? And I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. So part of the reason that I focused on writing was because I wanted to better integrate my life and my activism. I experienced the Black German community is actually a very good place to be a Black mother activist, but it's still not perfect. So I've often gone to events and things with my children, and someone has taken care of the children. There's been childcare organized, and it was great. But it's still hard. It's still really hard. And I think the children still do take a back seat if you're really in the thick of it. So I decided I wanted to take a step back and focus much more on how I can better manage the mothering aspect of my work and the activist aspect. And I see them tightly linked. And then the writer part comes. At the time, I had it in that order: mother, mother, activist, writer, because I felt like the activism really informed my writing, that I had a specific aim when I became a writer, or when I started to publish. I wanted to have literature that I felt there wasn't enough of, where Black women were in a main role and they weren't being portrayed in a stereotypical way. There wasn't an abundance of racist language just for the hell of it. Black women could pick up my books and read them and not feel insulted or not feel erased. That was my political aim with my work. And then when I published with Éditions Assemblage my first novella, I also decided that it would be really good to share this access that I had to the publishing world with others. So that's why I became an editor as well. The editorial part of my work is perhaps the part that I devote the least time to. But I find it very important. There are many authors out there. There are many Black German authors or Black people living in Germany who would love to write if they could have a chance to have a writing stipend or have access to these competitions or have a chance to speak to agents and be introduced to publishing houses. They're there. It's, I would say, a lack of imagination on the part of publishers and agents that we haven't got more Black writers in Germany or in Austria or in Switzerland at the moment.
And that kind of segues into an issue I wanted to raise as well, which is what role academics, I mean, given that 4 out of 5 of us here are sort of, our main job is to do academic work, how we play into that as well. But, you know, are we talking about it enough? Are we working on it enough? When I read your Klagenfurter Rede, first of all, I love the pictures.
Yes. Here, there's one of them.
Yes. And there's one where the flowers are all wearing little kind of coronavirus masks.
Yeah. Oh, I can look for that.
But one of the other things I loved was you cite, yes, you cite Chinua Achebe.
Yeah.
And that wonderful line that writers aren't only writers, they're also citizens. And serious and good art has always existed to help to serve humanity, which I would almost kind of see as the definition of art, and anything that doesn't do that, for me personally, kind of falls outside of that realm that we as academics kind of gatekeep of you know, what belongs in as art and what doesn't. But that also makes me interested in how art, so your writing and activism and academia could maybe work together more. And you know, it's a big question, but I'm just interested to hear what you think.
I think it's a brilliant question because once upon a time I was an academic, very long time ago. I was trying to become a doctor in business history, and I'm really glad that crashed and burned, I have to tell you. But when I first started publishing in Éditions Assemblage, and when I first started the Witness series, which is this series of books that invite Black authors to write about their experiences of living in German-speaking countries, the only way, actually, that I could imagine that there would be any attention paid at all to this literature was through academia. I just couldn't, I didn't have an imagination of how else it could be done. So this book was published, or these books were published, and then it was like, how can we get it onto syllabi, whatever it's called? How can we make university departments aware of it? I couldn't imagine it any other way. And interestingly enough, and I might be wrong, but it seems to me that the Germanistic departments, the German studies departments in the US are the ones that are leading the way on looking at Black German literature. I haven't yet had a lot of contact with universities in the UK. I think this is one of the first times. But in Germany itself, or in Switzerland or in Austria, it feels to me like the academy in German-speaking countries is extremely focused on whiteness without naming whiteness. And everything else is framed as other, and it confirms something about the whiteness, right? It's not seen as an integral part of what Germany is. It's seen as this additional thing. And I've been impatient with that. I haven't made any attempts to try to get more into. I think it's starting now. Again, because of this label, Ingeborg Bachmann Preisträgerin, I've now got a lot more influence. But before that, I don't think anyone really was interested. And so it was really important actually to, for example, I think the BGHRA, Black German Historical Research Association, is that right? Invited Sandrine and I back in 2013, I believe, to a conference, and we presented the Little Book of Big Visions and talked about our work, and it just felt so electric. It felt like this is the place to do it. In Germany, in fact, my first reading after I won the prize was in Berlin. And it was a brilliant turnout, and it was an exciting atmosphere because it was the first time on stage. Since then, it was home game, so to speak. All my fans were in the audience, and a guy actually kind of told me off for focusing on activism, because I had said, yes, I identify as a Black author, and this is why. And I talked a little bit about the aims of my writing, and he said, no, you're a serious writer now. We've given you this prize. Other people would have had to, like, hat gesagt, die hätten sich den Finger wund schreiben müssen, diesen Preis zu bekommen, which kind of suggests that I didn't have to work hard to get the prize, because, you know, they just kind of threw it out to me that year. And he was like, no, so take your job seriously and write. Which reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you've heard about this, there's like a debate going on. A Jewish German piano player called Igor Levit has been criticized recently in a newspaper article for doing too much politics, and he should just focus on piano playing. So there's this idea that real literature doesn't engage with these mortal things, right? And if you want to be a real literary figure, then you write and you do something that's aesthetically pleasing, but leave the politics, please, to one side. Yeah.
I feel like this debate is so old in a way, you know, the whole art for art's sake. I mean, you know, Sartre wrote about engaged literature. So to me, your position is it's not new, you know, it's just this ongoing battle, you know, between different people. Yeah.
There was Brecht, there was Böll. Like, what are you talking about? These people did that. Why should I suddenly not do that? And in what real world am I going to go on stage and start reading a text and nobody's going to notice that I'm Black? Like, that makes no sense.
To me, the people who only want to focus on the aesthetic, if anything, it's they don't want to deconstruct their own whiteness. They don't want to do that same work, you know, that other authors are doing, you know, interrogating, you know, the norms and things like that. What you were saying, it reminded me of the fact that the first time we met was at the GSA, at the German Studies Association in the US, a long time ago in Kansas City, of all places.
I remember,
yeah, we were in the same like seminar. And it just made me think about how, at least in the US, I do feel that like activism and academia and Black German writing, you know, is all intertwined, because, you know, meeting you made me want to read your work, and then I put your work on my syllabus, and then my students, you know, go to grad school and say, I want to write about this work, you know. So it is kind of all interconnected, and I think, yeah, a lot of it starts with us as academics putting these texts, not only putting them on the syllabus, but citing, you know, Black German authors and scholars. So
it's really important, I think, and I'm really grateful. Like Sarah, when I read the paper, or Priscilla, when you came to Germany and you did that talk about the text, I honestly think that those texts, I was going to say they could not be written in the German context. They have not been written. At least no one has come to me with a text in German that's of that quality and of that depth. When my speech that I gave for the opening of the Klagenfurter Rede, when I gave that speech, I was really scanning the newspapers to try to what happened. Again, I'm relying on feedback, right? And in the speech, I deliberately say, this is nothing without reception. If you don't receive what I'm saying and engage with it, it's a monologue. And I was really disappointed. There was the majority of the feedback that I got for the speech, the newspaper articles, the majority spoke about how this speech was an impassioned plea against discrimination or against racism in language or something like that, which certainly was also part of the speech. But I felt very, like, pessimistic about how are we going to speak with each other about critical whiteness, or the overwhelming whiteness of the German-speaking literature industry, if you don't even pick it up when I was so gentle with you guys, you know, you don't want to pick it up when I put it in a speech like that. A couple of articles were written which did pick up on those things and really critiqued the response of the speech. In fact, there was no response during the 3 days of the competition. My speech wasn't referred to at all. And at the end, when everybody was thanked, I wasn't thanked. So I thought that was kind of eye-opening, yeah. And so that was picked up. But these were, I can't explain, they're like blog articles. They weren't established newspapers. They weren't from a university department. And it would be so wonderful. I don't mind even if I'm going to be criticized. That's okay, because I really want to know, is my work having any effect? So I'm open to hear what negative feedback there might be, but there was nothing, you know. There was one newspaper article which criticized the speech, and if I understand the critique properly, it was that I had listed a lot of names of Black writers writing in German, or Black German writers, and I was demanding that the white literature establishment learn this canon. And that was arrogant of me to expect that. That was the criticism. And I was like, well, if that's your takeaway, then it's, you know,
Yeah,
right,
it was my
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that would be a really nice place to move to talking about whether things have changed in Germany recently. Do you feel, you know, with the George Floyd death, and, you know, with all the publicity around Black Lives Matter, which really has made an impact, I know, in the US and in the UK. I wondered if you were aware of you know, things shifting a bit.
Good question. I do believe it had some impact, definitely. I think what happened was, we anyway had a situation where Black German communities have been piling on the pressure around decolonization. The moves to change street names did not begin this year, right? That's been going on for a long time. There's a discussion going on right now about whether the German word for race, Rasse, should be replaced in the German constitution. That's been going on for a long time, actually, that discussion. Conversations around racial profiling have been going on for a long time. And what happened in June this year was that there was a sudden gear shift. Why did that happen? I'm assuming that there was a pressure pot explosion situation where all the stuff going around COVID-19 pandemic, people either being forced to sit at home with their children, or forced to work amazing hours if they're working in hospitals or working in supermarkets, you know, really exposed on the front line to. So there's a lot of anxiety in the air. It started to be discussed that people who were working in those jobs were normally of minority backgrounds, minority ethnic backgrounds, Black backgrounds, of color. So they were being disproportionately affected by these things. We were starting to talk about how more Black people are dying of COVID-19 proportionally than whites and such. And then a man is murdered on camera by a police officer over an extended period of time, and it was very hard to avoid seeing it. Actually, I managed to avoid seeing it, but it took a lot of effort. You know, I had to constantly click things away. So you've got lots of people who are sitting at home, worried about their future anyway, anxious, and then they see somebody murdered on camera, and then Black people are saying, this is not new. And there was a kind of pressure pot situation that exploded, and the momentum took off around the world, and it took off also in Germany. What was interesting about the situation in Germany was the immediate knee-jerk response of most German commentators was, oh, is there racism in Germany too? That was really fascinating after all this time. what I was very impressed by was how quickly the conversation did move from is there racism to don't keep asking this ridiculous question. Of course there is racism. There were a few German chat show hosts. I think someone's collected a statistic about chat show hosts where like they've listed all the people who do chat shows, all white, all the people they invite, typically male and white. Every now and then, every 10 episodes, they might invite a person of color, and every 20 episodes, they might invite a black person, kind of thing. They were having discussions on Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, COVID-19, no black person in sight. And then, was it Maischberger? Then there was this one moment where, like, how are you doing this without inviting black people to talk about it? How is that possible? There was like a Twitter storm. And Maischberger responded by inviting a black person from the United States.
Like I kind of stumbled into this mess because I had no idea who Maischberger was. You know, just a friend, a black friend of mine who teaches German in the States said, oh, they want to they want to talk to someone in the States about what's going on. I said, oh, okay, sure. So yeah, I was really overwhelmed when I saw on Twitter all the backstory of everything. And I did the best I could to change the conversation, but it is really frustrating that whenever they want an expert on racism, they always want to invite someone from the US.
Yeah. And it was great because that experience, what happened then was that there was like a black Twitter conversation going on where the black people in Germany were like, Maischberger, do you not think we speak to each other? We know Priscilla. And what Priscilla said or how Priscilla responded was totally in sync with what the black people were saying. Following that, black people did then get invited, and lo and behold, they were experts, they were able to speak German, they were knowledgeable about the subject, they were able to teach the commentators a thing or two about race and racism and Polizeigewalt and such. It was, for some people, it was like the first time that they had primetime television exposure, and people were really amazed. And I think that did cause a slight shift. I'm optimistic that it caused a shift, but I'm not going to be like, everything's better now. There's still a long way to go.
I'm curious, what's your reaction to the BVG's decision to change the name of Straße? When I heard about that, I was really shocked, because as you've said, this is a fight that's been going on for years, and it felt like the momentum of George Floyd was part of what kind of put the pressure on them to do that. Does this make you more optimistic about the way where things are going?
I agree that this was a very special moment in June 2020 where lots of things were suddenly made possible that the Black German community had been fighting for so long. I've got this picture there. I'm going to hold it to the camera. This is me saying, yes, please change this stupid name. We call it M-Straße, Mohrenstraße. I guess it's the English word Moor Street. And it's just a name that most Black people in Germany do not identify and have no interest in seeing on an underground station. And most Black people know that experience of going past that station and just feeling really uncomfortable, or having to go to my child's kindergarten was in that street for a long time, and that was just not nice. Having to walk down that street and having to write to the kindergarten with this word, it's just insulting. And the M-Straße festival, where that picture was taken, is a street festival which celebrated the renaming of M-Straße. So the street hadn't actually been renamed yet, but still, the last 6 years, we've been celebrating it anyway. It's been really nice. And we would do things like that where we would all hold up our favorite name of what it should be changed to. And Anton Wilhelm Amel is the first known Black German university lecturer, professor of law. I think he studied in Halle and such. So we've been doing that work. And then there was all of a sudden, everybody's posting a black square on Instagram and hashtag Black Lives Matter everywhere. And people are donating money to Black organizations in Germany. So, okay, that's nice. And then there's these symbolic changes. So one of them is changing the underground, changing the name. And I think originally they wanted to change the underground station name to, oh, I've forgotten the name, but it's one of the streets that are nearby. But apparently that name was the name of an anti-Semitic guy. So then they had to think again. But by then, the name change had gone through to change the name of the street. So I believe the name change of the street has been decided, Anton Wilhelm Ammelstrasse, and therefore the underground station will also be Anton Wilhelm. Finally, right?
That's wonderful.
But it's ridiculous. I need to stress, it is really ridiculous and painful and shameful that it takes the death of a Black person to get these changes through. And how many more Black people will need to die before the white imagination catches up with the fact that there is deadly racism going on and it needs to be addressed. Yeah.
Well, you're right. I'm actually have been working on a paper this week where I stress that white people they need the spectacle of racism, the violent spectacle in order to acknowledge it. Whereas, I just finished reading Olivia Wenzel's novel. I feel like it has so many examples of just like the banal, everyday experiences with racism that Black people and people of color have that a lot of white Germans just it's not on their radar.
Right. That's absolutely true. And that's, I think, part of the discussion around how can Black people or how can Black authors write and how is their work received. And the interesting thing, I don't even know if the right word is interesting. One thing that frustrated me about the criticism, the literature criticism around Olivia Wenzel's book and around Jackie Tome. Jackie Tome, also an Afro-German writer who wrote a book called Brüder. There was a kind of, the books were put, in battle with each other. There was a kind of, this is the correct way to write about the Afro-German experience, and this is you don't do this. This is political. And that's highly disrespectful to both authors. And it was very frustrating to follow that. And that's part of the inspiration of why I wrote the talk, is to say, Black people should just write whatever they want to write. Like, again, this is in dialectic with the fact that I consider myself to be a politically Black author and I have a specific aim. And I know that what I write has an effect on the people who read it and on the context I'm working in. But I don't know. Peter Hanke can write what he likes. Why can't I?
I don't know if you've seen it, Priscilla, because it probably hasn't been as big in the States, but there was a little explosion in the UK not that long ago when Bernardine Evaristo, who won the Booker Prize this year, responded to Martin Amis, who'd decided that the Booker Prize no longer had authority, I'm quoting him, had authority, because it had become so political in its focus.
No, I hadn't heard about this.
Yeah, which I guess is kind of code for a Black woman won it. Suddenly it's so political, dealing with the life experience of people who aren't me.
Yeah.
It's way too political.
Great quote, I like that.
Sharon, when you were talking about people's response to your Klagenfurter-Rede, it reminded me of when Emine Sebgi Özdemir won the Ingeborg Bachmann Prize, years ago, and people said, she wasn't really a writer, and that it was like childlike, her writing, and she only won it because she's Turkish. So it's the same old stuff again and again. I guess if you're not a white man, your work is inherently, it's only political. It has no aesthetic value. We're constantly fighting these battles.
It doesn't teach you something about the fundamental human condition, right? If you're writing from a Black perspective or even a female, even a white female perspective is way too much. And yeah, what can you do? I write anyway.
Right. I have to say, reading Olivia Wenzel's novel was such an eye-opener for me. As a white woman, it's not that I didn't know at some level that those everyday experiences were there, but just reading about them and over and again, and I just felt, wow, I'm co-experiencing this for the first time ever.
Yeah.
What it's like to be that person. So So yeah, right, it's really important.
Yeah, and that's the power of literature, I think, or art, that it can give you a perspective or access to a perspective that you don't have yourself. And I want to say I also learned a lot from reading Olivia Benson, because I did grow up as a Black person in East Germany with, you know, an extremely white Umfeld, whatever that word is, context. So I also was reading it, and these are the stories that Black people could be telling each other. Even if white people don't want to read our books, at least let us at least publish them so that we can read them, you know, we can read each other's stories. That would be my wish. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that kind of literature's role of you know, enabling us to think outside our own experience is just so crucial. Yeah, I wondered, we have many questions, but could we move on maybe to talk about the questions we had about narrative and what makes a narrative voice exciting?
Yeah. What I like about a narrative voice, I was trying to think of an example, but I like fallible voices. Is that what it's called? As narrators that are fallible, that make mistakes, and you like them anyway, quoting people. I really do like confusion, as you might have realized. I like confusing people. Because I find confusion productive. I find it like, so for example, when I first wrote Herr Gertrude setzt sich hin, I really wanted to, again, the idea of the story was to talk about critical whiteness. That was the main point. So with the first sentence, I wanted to decenter whiteness, right? So what I associated with whiteness, or privilege, let's say, to extend it further, is this idea that you know everything and you're secure and you have your knowledge and everything's familiar. And with the first sentence, I wanted to create some kind of, to unseat this certainty. So with the first sentence, the reader is forced to make a decision. It says in the instructions, there are instructions how to read the text. It says, cover one of your eyes, and then you have to decide in that moment, am I going to do it or not? And it's so amusing to watch people struggle with that. It does happen that people are like, and when I read the story out in Klagenfurt, there's a line in the story that says, if you want to cough, this is the right moment. And somebody coughed accidentally, but it floored everyone. It was so good. And those are the kind of moments that I try to bring out in literature. So just working with confusion and humor. I have a message, I have an aim, but I think if you see it straight away, if it's obvious what my message and aim is straight away, then I haven't done a good job. It should kind of arise. It should be an experience that you feel rather than something that you access cognitively, I think.
Yes.
What do you think? I've been wanting to ask you a question the whole time. How do you see that? That would be my wish, but what do you think?
I was going to say, for me, the Herr Gertrude story, it was an experience because I had no idea where it was going, but it was I enjoyed reading it. You know, it was humorous and there were critical things. And so when I got the message, it was like an aha moment. So I think it was a very subtle way that you make the message clear.
Mm.
And I was going to say that I love what you just said just now about the fallible narrator, because I'd been reading your work and then I read Olivia Wenzel's, and I was saying to my partner, why do I find these books so exciting? You know, there's quite a lot of new writing. I read a lot of new writing and I don't find all of it exciting. And in the end, I said, I think actually it's because these are not arrogant narrative voices. They're self-consciously, and I didn't say fallible, but I wish I had. It's so boring reading arrogant narration, and it's so interesting reading narration that is kind of slightly destabilizing me.
Yeah,
read it, slightly tipping me off balance.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's fine, but yeah, that excitement.
I love giving it to the students and asking them to work out how to begin, and seeing them kind of involve their bodies and their voices, and having some of them read a bit and then others another bit in a slightly different voice. And I think I guess it's the way that they all change it up a bit every time that is really special. And they really respond to kind of the mix of the humour and the fantastical. So it's super recognisable on one level, and it's something completely out there on the other. And that's what they kind of very, very often comment on. And I guess for me, I sort of noticed maybe like a shift in your stories from The Things I'm Thinking Was Smiling Politely to Synchronicity and Hypnotic, towards the kind of the surreal and the fantastic. Is that a fair kind of shift? Is that kind of something that, yeah?
I think it is. I was like, is that, because I feel like I haven't written that much. So, but I remember when I remember the difference between The Things I'm Thinking While Smiling Politely and Synchronicity. That was a deliberate move, because The Things I'm Thinking While Smiling Politely, I was often asked, or people didn't even ask. That's even worse, when they don't ask and they think, is it an autobiography? Is it an autobiography? Is she really like that? I was like, no, I'm nice. Again, this is a fallible character. I deliberately wrote her as a fallible character. I didn't want to write a noble black, is it a noble black figure, someone who's good and suffers and everybody's happy that they make it in the end. I wanted to write someone who you kind of understand why she does what she does, but she really annoys you and you're kind of horrified at the same time. That was my aim. And then I got this feedback that people kept thinking it had something much more to do with me than it actually does. So then I wrote Synchronicity, a person who loses the ability to see color. Who's gonna comment on that? But still people wonder if I'm okay. How's your eyes, Sharon? I'm like, okay. So then I wrote a story about a white guy. I'm safe there, I thought. And of course, people sometimes think I see myself in Ada. But the truth of the matter is, I wanted to I tried to free myself from the realistic thing, because I wanted not to focus so much on whether the story is true or not. I don't find that interesting. I find it interesting to figure out what a story can inspire, what it leads you to, what thoughts it leads you to next. And although it began as a story on critical whiteness, I very quickly started to think about privilege in general. And I thought of myself as a privileged person. So for example, I'm a person who doesn't need a wheelchair. So when I decide I want to look for a place to live, or I want to visit a friend down the road, I don't have to work out if there's a lift there, or if the lifts are working, if I can fit into the bus and such. That is a certain amount of Lebenszeit that I'm given free. I can just, I have energy and things that other people who are using wheelchairs don't have. And I thought about that. What does that do with you? If you have this kind of, you can just easily walk through the world and everything falls into place. And that feeling that I accessed because I thought about privilege, I then tried to put into Herr Grötrup. So sometimes I would even claim that if there's any figure in the story, then I'm the Herr Grötrup rather than any other person.
I love that. So kind of identify me with Herr Grötrup punks.
Go for it. Yeah.
My characters, here I am.
I'm not trying to point the finger at anyone, really. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to say, look, we have these issues in society, and how can we deal with them? But to deal with them, we have to recognize them. I think that's my thing.
And if I could just say that I love the egg voice. I love it when the egg begins to speak. Is that just so kind of blows out of the water, or even the anthropocentrism of representation, and I think that kind of move into the fantastic is something really that really challenges us to think of other worlds.
The egg is a lot of fun. I really had a lot of fun writing the egg, and the egg is in the new book, but it's not an egg. But you'll recognize it. You'll know that.
Okay, so yeah, Sharon, I was just wondering, what authors do you happen to be reading these days? German authors or it could be authors from abroad.
So the honest answer is I haven't been reading much because I found it hard to, I don't even want to say concentrate. I found it hard to absorb other people's writing while I was trying to produce writing myself. It just felt too difficult to do. I couldn't just read a story and appreciate the story. I was like in editor mode, analyzing it and so on. I'm beginning to be able to read again. Mostly I was able to read though non-fiction texts. I've been reading Max Czolek. I don't know if he's a Jewish German author. He wrote a book called Disintegriert euch, which I really liked and really recommend. And now I'm reading his latest one, Gegenwartsbewältigung. I also did read Michel Götting's book, Contrapunctus, recently. And I'm reading Olivia Wenzel's book at the moment. I'm almost through with Olivia Wenzel's book. And I started to read, there's a book called Streulich by Dennis Oder. That's on my pile. Yeah, and there's a book, what's it called again? Sorry, this book, Was man von hier aus sehen kann, Mariana Leckie, which has been highly recommended many, many times. And I sort of dipped into it and I'm enjoying that too. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank all of you, but particularly Sharon Dodua Otoo for taking the time to talk to us so fascinatingly, so interestingly about your work and about your activism and about your motherhood. It's been really a privilege and a delight. So thank you very much for being the President's Guest 2020.
Thank you so much. I've had a really wonderful time. Thank you for your wonderful questions and for the conversation and for your work.